tonight I want to look at the septic addendum and the well addendum. If you're going to be in real estate for very long in the Tri-Cities, you will come across a property that's going to have a septic and or well. It's kind of funny because in some places in Kennewick, even what we would think is like kind of central Kennewick, there's homes that are still on septic systems. They're not hooked up to city sewer yet, right? So it's not necessarily homes that are out in the country. There's homes in West Pasco, what's surrounded, nice big homes, but they're on large pieces of property and they're still on septic systems. So I want to pull up the well addendum and the septic system and go through those this evening with you, okay?
Can I chime in a question just as you're going through this? Maybe you can find a way to answer it through the process.
Sure.
So a home that I bought in Walla Walla that was centrally located, you would not think that it was on a septic in any way, shape, or form. So,
right.
And I bought it from my father's a plumbing contractor, and I bought it from one of his plumbers, right? So
sure.
he was paying city water, everything for the house. So I buy this house, and somewhere along the line, I was doing some yard work or whatever, and I'm like, the ground is kind of sinking, and it ended up. So my dad comes out and looks at it or whatever, and he's like, "Yeah, you're on a septic." And so we had to go back, and all those years, I mean, it had been sold twice, and no one had ever found out. And so, unfortunately, the seller, he had to go back, and they had to dig up the road and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, that's why why I would have never thought to have a septic inspection.
Right.
Because you're in the middle of the city. So I guess that just case in point, like, why the heck would I would never have thought that. And then the city, of course, was charging us for it, and they probably knew that it was septic.
Right. Been paying for sewer that whole time, and you never were hooked up to it, right?
Or whatever. So water, sewer, garbage. But I don't know if you somewhere in that line, like, how would you know that?
Well, and that is an issue. That happened just here a couple months ago in Kennewick, where the person who had been living in it for the last 5 years thought they were on city sewer. Mm-hmm. And so when they filled the seller's disclosure and everything, it was
exactly, yeah.
And then the basement bathroom backed up.
Mm-hmm.
So they called out Roto-Rooter. Roto-Rooter comes out and says, "Well, your plumb's in your septic tank."
Yeah.
The guy goes, "Well, I'm not on a septic tank. I'm hooked up to." I mean, they'd only been in the house a couple months.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, you're on a septic tank. No, I'm on. So there's this argument between the Roto-Rooter guy and the homeowner. Mm-hmm. And so finally they call out the city, and the city says, "No, you're not hooked up. This property's not hooked up to city sewer."
So there seriously wasn't any septic lids? Like, how do they not know?
There was, but it had been buried, and apparently it hadn't been checked for years. The people who lived in it before for like 5 years, they never had it pumped and inspected. And when they bought it, it hadn't been pumped and inspected.
How old was the house? Well, I know health department.
This is mid-70s.
Like, and mine was 50s, like 1954.
Right.
But the city ended up having to kind of eat crow a little bit, and they took care of the because they had to cut the road open and everything.
I know, right.
Close the road down. So they ate that part, but he had to take care of decompressing the tank and then putting new sod down and like all that kind of stuff on the actual property. But
right,
we would have never known.
Yeah.
And then it's who knows when the last time it was pumped.
Well, yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And the weird thing about this one, it was over on Fillmore Street. The neighbors were on city sewer. So somewhere along the line, that neighborhood, the homeowners had an opportunity to hook up to the city sewer. And so this was one of the houses that chose not to hook up to the city sewer.
Sure.
How crazy is that? So fortunately, it ended up not being a huge deal. The new homeowner, of course, he got upset and he got a hold of the previous homeowner, and the previous homeowner, they didn't know anything, and the agent didn't know anything because, and it ended up being, they sure enough found where the septic tank was, pulled the lid, and there was nothing wrong with it. It just needed to be serviced. It just needed to be pumped. Mm-hmm. So they just had to get used to the idea they were on a septic system now instead of on city sewer. But it can be a big issue. And so the only way to know is by contacting the city department, planning department, or health department, and finding out. But in your instance, that wouldn't have worked because they thought that they would.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really weird. Most often, I think homeowners know, and so it's not weird like that. But there are instances where that's just really unusual. So, am I sharing my screen? I'm not sharing my screen, am I? Let's go to the septic addendum first here, and make this bigger. Can you guys see that? Okay. How come I can't blow that up? You think I should be able to? At home, I have a Mac computer, and I'm not quite used to it. I usually, my laptop and all my other computers are HP, but my desktop at home is a.
There's a enter full screen. If you go, yeah, there, or right below your mouse says full screen.
Right below my mouse.
You print, send, go to the left.
Oh.
There you go.
Holy cow, there we go. Wow, okay, thank you. Perfect. That's what I wanted. Okay, so I don't know very many properties that have a shared septic system. I've never run into that. I guess, in some places that could be a thing where, there was a parcel of property that had 2 homes built, or 2 parcels that had home built and shared a septic system. I've never heard of that. Most often, the homes are going to have a private septic system. The other thing that's sometimes confusing is the language on-site sewage system, OSS. That's kind of the technical term that's used, and if you go to the county health department or the city health department, a lot of times that's what a septic system is referred to as, an on-site septic system or on-site sewage system. This paragraph number 2, seller represents to the best of seller's knowledge that the on-site sewage system serving the property, A, does not require repair other than pumping and normal maintenance. B, does not currently violate any applicable local, state, and federal laws, standards, and regulations. And C, has no material defects. All right. So there is a snag in here that you have to be very careful about, and I would not have known about it except for a couple of years ran across this. And that's B, does not currently violate applicable local, state, and federal laws, standards, regulations. Can you think what that might be? How could a on-site sewage system violate a local, state law or standard or regulation? Can you think of
anything code related, because code changes all the time.
Yes, code related. So here's the thing. These systems are typically built for a number of bedrooms. And so this happened to me. Home was added onto, and 2 bedrooms were added and a bathroom, but the septic system wasn't improved. I don't know where it was in the permitting process or any of that. I don't know what happened. All I know was that it became a huge problem for the lender, because the septic system was rated for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, and now we had a 5-bedroom, 3-bath home, and the septic system was out of compliance. So if there's been an addition to the home, that is something that you need to pay attention to. is that the rating of the septic system. If somebody asks you about, let's say you have a buyer who wants to buy a home, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, but they're buying the home with the intention of adding a room or a bathroom. That is something that you need to be aware of, that it's going to be more than just adding a bedroom and bath. It probably will also mean upgrading the on-site sewage system. Does that make sense? Number 3, maintenance records. Seller shall deliver to buyer the maintenance records, if applicable, of the on-site sewage system serving the property within 10 days of mutual acceptance. Typically, if the homeowner has had the homes pumped and inspected within the last year, and we'll get to that here in just a little bit, they'll have those records and they can give those to the buyer, and that will satisfy doesn't have to, but may satisfy the need to have it re-inspected and repumped. Okay. Well, I don't know what happened there. Okay. The seller shall comply with any local regulations or ordinances that may require seller to conduct an inspection of the OSS prior to the sale of the property. There are some counties in the state of Washington where that is required now, and it's pretty much going to become a statewide thing. And the other thing they're talking about doing is that they're not going to allow septic companies to do that. It's going to have to be done by a county health inspector. So that's actually something Washington Realtors and our local Realtor Association is trying to fight in coordination with the county, because the county doesn't want that on their shoulders either. Okay.
So you're saying, Ron, that any house that has a septic before it sells, no matter if there's records it's been inspected in the past, even 3 months, it would have to be inspected again by the county?
Correct. They're talking about at the point of sale. So every time a home is sold, the county health department individual would have to come out and inspect that system.
So question on that though, if we can't use private inspectors anymore and the county health system is already overloaded with everything else that they have to on, how is that going to happen in those time frames? I mean, that's like, and then you're putting a whole bunch of people out of business. So that makes no sense to me.
No, it doesn't make any sense to anybody. And that's why we're fighting it. Yeah, that's why we're fighting it. It doesn't make sense to anybody. Okay. But some bureaucrat in Olympia thought this was a great idea. Probably because it's what they require in California. I don't know. But all I know is that it is something that we're going to bat for and trying to. And the fact that not only the county, but also the Home Builders Association is on board with this too.
Well, because it affects Eastern Washington much more so than, obviously, the West Side.
Well, the funny thing is a lot of the things that get pushed are because of things happening on the West Side. So they have a lot higher rate of septic system failures on the West side of the state because of all the water that they get, because it's so wet over there. They have poor drainage in many areas. And so, unfortunately, what happens over there, they get a cold and over here, we get pneumonia. So from what I understand, I don't have the complete picture on this, but from what I understand, this is really being pushed from the other side of the state because of what's going on over there. Typically over here, we don't have the drainage problems that they have on the other side of the state. So anyway, so that's something to be watching for as we move forward. Paragraph number 5, inspection and pumping. Seller shall have the OSS inspected and, if the inspector determines necessary, pumped by the OSS service company at seller's expense. Seller shall provide buyer with a copy of the inspection report within 10 days. You'll notice that coordinates right above with the paragraph number 3. of mutual acceptance. If seller had the OSS inspected and if necessary pumped within 12 months of mutual acceptance by the OSS service company, and seller provides buyer with written evidence thereof, including an inspection report, seller shall have no obligation to inspect and pump the system unless otherwise required by buyer's lender. Can you think of a loan that may require it to be done in a shorter period of time than 12 months? There's only one that I'm aware of. Can you take a guess? VA loans.
Mm.
So, and typically it's not that big of an issue. The septic system, the septic people will, if you do the same company, he'll come out, he'll pull the lid, he'll take a look at it and say, yeah, it's good to go, and sign off on it. And it doesn't need to be pumped again. But if you have a VA loan, sometimes they will require a shorter period of time that the septic system has been serviced before they will finance the purchase of the house. Okay? This checkbox here, I have it checked in my templates. It's a right to the buyer to attend the inspection if checked, and if seller has not already conducted an inspection, buyer shall have the right to observe the inspection. Now, notice it doesn't say that buyer shall be there. It just says that buyer has the right. And seller shall provide buyer with 3 days notice of the date and time of the inspection. So buyer does not get to hold up when that inspection is going to occur. Seller just needs to provide 3-day notice. Buyer does not get to come back and say, wait a minute, that day and time doesn't work out for me. Now, hopefully both parties will be reasonable and they'll be able to negotiate that out. But keep in mind here, there's no obligation on the part of the seller to somehow fit into the buyer's schedule, right? All that is obligated on the part of the seller is that it gets inspected and, if necessary, pumped. And seller or buyer has the right to be there if it works out. Does that make sense? Because there's been some confusion around that. I've had people coming to me with their hair on fire that, oh my gosh, the seller had it pumped and inspected and my buyer didn't get an opportunity to be there. Well, did they give him a 3-day notice? Well, yeah, but it wasn't at a time that my buyer could be there. Well, that's not seller's problem necessarily. You know, it'd be nice if seller had tried to work that out, but you know, there's nothing that says that buyer gets to hold up the whole process of purchase and sale of a house if they can't be there, right? Any questions about that? What could be the issue of having a buyer present when that is inspected and possibly pumped? Can you think of anything? What could arise as an issue?
I mean, just guessing, but if the inspector thinks it doesn't need to be pumped because it's at a certain minimum level,
right?
But the home buyer disagrees because
Right.
they can see something in there and they want it completely empty.
Right. So, yeah, so there is this risk that the buyer will be out there and you know, they're the kind of geeky type where they think they know everything and they're going to argue with the septic system people about, you know, thinking that the tank has to be completely voided of everything that's in there. And that's not necessarily the case. Or that I had one guy who was arguing with the septic guy, Twilight Septic, came out, and I've used them a number of times, but he was arguing with the guy about the baffle that was in place in there, and that it was not right and was going to collapse, yada, yada, yada. Almost blew up the deal. And he really didn't know what he was talking about, but he had done some Googling online and done some research online about septic systems. So you need to be really careful about that and make sure that you instruct your buyer, if they're going to be there, that they need to let the septic people be the professionals to determine, the I don't know what you want to call it, but just to approve the system that is in place. And it's kind of like having a buyer at a home inspection, right? That's the risk that sometimes you have there as well. All right. Paragraph number 6, the OSS inspection contingency. This agreement is conditional on buyer's approval of the inspection report from the OSS service company. Its contingency shall be deemed waived unless the buyer gives notice of disapproval of the inspection report within 5 days after receipt of the inspection report. Have you ever seen an inspection report? Lori, you probably have. What does an inspection report usually look like?
They'll usually give a summary of what they see, and they'll kind of rank it on the importance versus minimal or keep an eye on. And then that's like a summary page, and then they'll go through each sections of the home, and they'll do pictures of what they call out and a brief description, and we have to try to figure out exactly how do we ask the seller to fix this item.
Well, that's a home inspection, but what about a septic?
Oh, a septic, sorry. Okay, what? Oh, a septic report?
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I have. It's simple. It's just usually a piece of paper, and it says when it was installed and when it was kind of satisfactory. It's very simple. It's kind of like things.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's just it. It's really, really simple. Often it's handwritten, and all it says that it was pumped, the lid was pulled and it was inspected on such and such a day. Everything was found to be satisfactory, and whether they pumped it or not.
Hey, quick question.
Sure.
Do you know, is there kind of a rule of thumb as to like how full a septic can be that, like the third-party company would deem it unnecessary to pump again?
Go
ahead, Lori.
I was just saying, I'm in a transaction right now that the listing agent is on a septic, and the listing agent countered back on here saying that the seller will only pump if the lender requires, because they put a new septic in less than 5 years ago. And so I was like, well, that's another thing I was freaking out. I'm like, has it been pumped in the last 12 months? No. So they countered back on me. So I was like, well, what the heck? And it was an FHA buyer, so I'm like, okay, well, I'll just take it to the lender and see if the appraiser calls it out. And then so when it comes now, we're like closing this Friday.
Right.
And so I went to Scott Unger, who's a lender. I said, okay, so are they calling out the septic that it needs to be pumped? And he said, nope, the appraiser just said it's good and kind of moving on to close. So the seller didn't even have to pump that tank, because they counted back as a lender, or the appraiser didn't require it. So that was new to me.
That's new to me too. That's interesting.
5 years is a long time.
Especially FHA. Usually FHA requires that be done in 12 months. Conventional, maybe not, but.
I was totally shocked.
Yeah.
How do your buyers feel about that?
They want the home. That's another thing. We had the talk. They want the home. I don't know what happened to my screen.
Yeah.
I've been having some interesting people during this whole COVID thing.
Yeah. There's Yeah, it's been very interesting. Let me tell you. Yeah, no, that does surprise me, Lori, especially with an FHA loan. I thought sure they would require it to be serviced
too.
within the last 12 months.
So I ran into that in Walla Walla, not here, but the appraiser based it on the septic tank rules of how many people that the tank is approved for, if it needs to be pumped every 3 years, every 2 years, every 5 years, or whatever. And so the appraiser came back and said, hey, it's okay. But
Right.
then I had the seller come back and say, oh, that's gross. I don't want somebody else's stuff in my yard. And so they requested that it was pumped. And so that was part of our, that we had to do that in order. The appraiser said it was okay. The lender said it was okay. But the buyer requested that it was pumped just because they wanted to move into a fresh, clean house.
Sure. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And part of what they inspect is making sure that you have the solid side of the tank and the gray water side of the tank. And what they're looking at is making sure that that solid side isn't filled up with, a material that will never degrade in there too. We had an agent in our office that the people who had lived there the last couple of years didn't know that there's some things you should not be flushing down your toilet into the septic system. And so it created a little bit of a challenge for the septic company to empty that out.
Mm. What's a kind of a ballpark cost to get a septic pumped?
I used to have mine done for like $500-600. It just depended on how often we had it done.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're not talking like a couple thousand typically.
No.
Okay.
I've had it done for as little as $350, and I think the one I had done most recently was like $450.
Okay, so probably not a major deal breaker for most.
Typically not. No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Right. As a matter of fact, early on, just remember this, early on, I paid to have a septic system pumped for my buyers who were moving into the house because the seller had it done like 13 months prior.
Mm.
And it was a manufactured home and out in Badger Canyon, and so they wanted it pumped, and they were really willing to kill the deal. And so I went ahead and paid the pump company, and I think that was Ray's, and it seemed like that was $350-400 or something like that. So
Okay. Thanks.
I wasn't willing to let the deal die, just over
Yeah.
$350-400. This is the well addendum. Now, something you need to be aware of in the Tri-Cities, I don't know about, I imagine Walla Walla, but there are a number of properties in the Tri-City area that have community wells.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that people don't understand about community wells that I discovered is that community wells often have safer water than city water. And one of the reasons for that is they have to be tested more often. Now, that's not always the case, but is frequently the case. But well systems are pretty common around here. And so, and by the way, it's not uncommon for a house to be on a well and be hooked up to city sewer, or to be on city water and have a septic system. So that's the other thing to be aware of, that sometimes you can have a combination of one of those for serving a property. But again, the language is similar. The seller is going to represent that the well currently has how many connections to it. And that connection is serving buildings. So it might be the home, but if they've got a shop, it could have 2 connections then, right? Seller representation. Seller represents that, except as explained below, to the best of the seller's knowledge, the well and water supply serving the property. Notice the very similar kind of language here. Provided adequate supply household and yard water for seller's use. B, are not presently contaminated by biological or chemical agents. I'm going to come back to that. Comply with all applicable local, state, federal standards, regulations, including applicable purity standards. And D, have no other material defects. So this B here are not presently contaminated by biological or chemical agents. Can you think of what would be the most common contamination that we probably will have in our wells around here?
Probably
The orchards.
nitrates,
Orchards?
orchards, yeah, farms.
Yep,
Stuff.
exactly right. Orchards. The big one is nitrates, but sometimes some of the chemicals from the orchards or vineyards. Yep. So nitrates is huge, and we've got a couple communities that's been a real problem with. That's where they have community wells that serve a large number of homes. Notice that this addresses the water well and supply system. So think about that for a moment. It's more than just the water that comes out of there, but it's also the water supply system. So that's going to include the pump, right? So that's why this D is really important, to have no other material defects. Okay, those two things are really huge, and that's why when you're representing a buyer who is going to purchase a home or property with a well system, that they take into consideration not just the water supply, but also the system that delivers that, right? So here's the well review period. Seller shall deliver to buyer all documents in seller's possession associated with the well, not limited to shared well agreements and maintenance records, within 10 days of mutual acceptance, right? If the buyer, in buyer's sole discretion, does not give notice of the disapproval in 5 days of receiving that, then this well documents review period shall conclusively be deemed satisfied. The buyer gives timely notice of disapproval, then this agreement shall be terminated and the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer. So seller has 10 days to give any documentation they have, whether it's a maintenance records or whether it's water quality records from the county health department, or if it's a shared community well agreement. All that needs to be delivered to the buyer, and buyer has 5 days to review that, okay? What happens if seller has no records, or the seller says, I don't have any records? How would you handle that? Because you will come across homeowners who they haven't tested their water, they haven't, really done anything with their well system for the last 10 or 15 years. How do you handle that?
Wouldn't you just request an inspection?
Yeah, you are going to want to have some kind of inspection done to the system and also a test done for the water.
That's what I was going to ask on too. It said water quality or whatever. Is that something that you have to do, or something that we can ask for? I mean, it's an easy
something that you can ask for, and the water quality test is typically pretty simple, but I really highly recommend that it be done. Right now, again, the vast majority of people on well systems, they're pretty good about this, but you are going to run across people who they don't have a care in the world and really haven't taken care of it because the system has worked the whole time that they were there, right? Why fix what's not broken is kind of the attitude, right? So here's paragraph number 4 is important then. The agreement is conditioned on buyer's approval of an inspection of the well and water supply system. Does that make sense? Buyer is advised to conduct all inspections necessary or reasonable to ensure that the well and water supply system is satisfactory to the buyer. So let me ask this question. Who is responsible to ensure that the water and water system is adequate?
Seller.
Read that sentence over again.
Okay. I don't know. I would think that if they're selling the house, they need to be selling it with the appropriate.
You would think,
Okay.
but in Washington State, it's caveat emptor.
Okay.
Buyer is advised to conduct all inspections necessary or reasonable to ensure that the well and water supply is satisfactory to the buyer. Seller can say, I've been here for 20 years. Never had the water tested. My family's all fine.
Sure.
I've never done anything to the water system. I've never, that pump's been running just beautiful for the last 15 years, right?
Then you could potentially run into not pass there, you're not being able to fund or not being able to be. I mean, if they have a horrible system, then what lender's going to potentially loan on it? So
well, you do have a lender issue here, but ultimately it's according to the satisfaction of the buyer.
okay.
So the weight is placed upon the shoulders of the buyer to make sure that the system is satisfactory, whatever that might be for them. Water quality, gallons per minute coming out of the wellhead, whatever that looks like, the water being delivered to the home, right? Whatever that looks like, it's got to be, the buyer has to be satisfied with that, and they need to do their due diligence, right? That's why this form is so important. Such inspections, line 23, such inspections may include test flow rate, purity standards, verification of the source that the source is adequate and that the system meets federal, state, and local standards, as well as any other matter of concern to who? To the buyer, not the seller, to the buyer. Any inspection shall be A, ordered by the buyer, B, performed by a qualified inspector of buyer's choice, C, completed at buyer's expense. And buyer shall have the right to attend the inspection. This contingency shall be waived unless buyer gives written notice of disapproval of the inspection within 10 days after mutual acceptance of the agreement, or within the timeline period of buyer's general inspection contingency, whichever is later. And if buyer gives written notice of disapproval, then they can terminate and get their earnest money back. So to me, this paragraph 4 is really, really big when you are representing a buyer who's looking at purchasing a piece of property that has a well. Who is responsible to making sure that that water and water delivery system meets standards and is to their satisfaction? Everything in this paragraph, everything places the responsibility on the buyer, even the expenses of it. Did you notice that?
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, is it possible that buyer could request that seller would pay for some of these expenses? Yes. Yes. You could have written in the contract that seller will perform and pay for a water quality test by the county health department. You could put in the contract that seller will have a qualified inspector of seller's choice perform an inspection of the water delivery system at seller's expense. You could do that. But as this paragraph is written right here, if you leave it as it is, everything is up to the buyer to do at buyer's expense. Any questions about that? Any ahas or any oh my gods? Or any, that's not fair.
That's not fair.
I do have a question, Ron, and again, I'm very new, so forgive
No,
my.
that's okay. That's why we're here.
So, okay, so you said if you left that paragraph as is, I mean, it's not really a paragraph you can change. Do you just add an addendum outlining the changes, or is there something else, or you would do it number 6 in other maybe?
Yes, very good. I would do that
Okay.
number 6.
Okay.
So that's a great question. That's a great question. So yes, I would do that number 6. Number 6, I would put number 1, seller to pay for water quality test with the county health department. Seller to pay for water supply system inspection by an inspector of seller's choice. That's where I would put the changes there,
Okay.
right? So now I'm transferring the responsibility from the buyer to the seller. So, Mr. Seller, I'm willing to pay for your property, but I want you to do the inspections and you to pay for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, that's not totally unusual.
Okay.
Now, it's not to say that seller can't come back and counter offer, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to put that in that paragraph 6 there and ask for the seller to take care of it.
Okay.
If I was the listing agent, my advice, my counsel to my seller would be to get it done, to have this ready to go so that you are able to provide these records to any buyer to assure them that you've got great water quality, or this is what the water quality is, and the water delivery system has been inspected. That's what I would advise my seller,
Okay.
but that doesn't always happen.
And then same question I had earlier, like what are ballpark costs associated with the water quality test and the well inspection?
Well, the water quality test is actually pretty simple, and the last time I think I had it done was like $30.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a matter of collecting a bottle of water, and you get a piece of paper and you say where you got it from, what tap out of the house that you got it from, and then typically takes. Last time I did it, it took a little over a week to get it back.
Okay.
The inspection of the water supply system, I've never done that, so I couldn't tell you what the cost of that was, but I don't imagine that it's going to be much more than a home inspection.
Oh, so I mean, but that's some change.
Yeah, it's going to be at least a couple $100, maybe $300 or $400.
Okay.
Yeah. Because what the well inspector is going to come out, he's going to give you a gallons per minute at the wellhead, and then he's going to test all of the places in the home where water's coming through, and also he's going to test the pump system, amperage and voltage, and all the the electrical system that runs the pump.
Mm-hmm.
So you get a pretty thorough inspection of the water supply system by the time he gets done.
Okay. Okay.
And so yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Ron, real quick question, just because I haven't done, well, I have done one well out here, but what's the typical depth? I mean, I don't, compared to, the only thing I can compare it to is in Walla Walla. We had wells, I mean, I sold a house that had a 45-foot well, and then another one that's 165 feet. And the 45-foot well was right next to a livestock yard. I mean, that was a shit show, literally.
Right. Yeah, I can't imagine.
So, but I mean, what's average out here? just because we're so dry, I would assume it would have to be deeper.
Well, no, it's all over the place. It really depends on where you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's how close you are to the river.
Sure.
You know, I mean, if you're up on Clodfelter Road, you're probably 1,000 feet. But,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
if you're down in the Yakima Basin or anywhere, you probably, you know, tens of feet. And then if you're up Badger Canyon, maybe a few hundred feet. So it's really all over the place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have 2 lots on Columbia Park Trail, and they have a shared well between the 2 lots, and that's just a little over 100 feet.
Okay.
But it's up the hill from the Yakima River. So, okay, last paragraph here. Buyer acknowledges that water supply requirements and water use limits vary by city, county, watershed. Buyers advised to consult with an expert regarding water supply requirements and water use limits for the property. Who would be the expert that you might point the buyer to? Remember, we're going to be the source of the source, not the source.
That'd be the
The
county.
place that we could point the buyer to that they could get information about wells and restrictions and water rights and all of that. Can you think of any place?
Yeah, the county or
For Department of Ecology?
Department of Ecology, yes, as well as the county health department. So Department of Ecology be number 1. So here's the thing you need to be aware of, particularly in the Tri-Cities, is the Yakima Basin all the way down to Benton City. And there's huge restrictions that went into effect July 1, 2020. That are going to have a huge impact upon people buying homes outside of the irrigation districts. So much so that your water is going to be limited to some, you know, what is it? It's like 1/8 of an acre you can water now.
Wow.
It's crazy. And all the new wells will have meters on them.
Wow.
So if you've kept abreast of anything that's going on up around Ellensburg and Kittitas and all of the water issues they're having up there, that's slowly come down the valley to us. So that is something to, we've, in the Tri-City Association of Realtors, we've had 3 meetings now all around water rights. And water rights is going to become a major issue here in the next few years. And you really need to pay attention to that. And again, be the source of the source, advise the buyer to get a hold of the Department of Ecology, get a hold of the health department, and make sure that they understand what their water rights are and what their requirements are, even if they're on a well, right? And even if they bought a piece of property, we have properties like out around the Red Mountain area, out on Harrington Road, where people have wells and they're watering an acre and a half of water, and it looks great right now. But somewhere down the road, the county's going to have to come down there and shut those people off because they only have water rights to water half an acre, or in some instances, just a quarter acre. Okay. So it's becoming that the whole water rights issue thing is becoming huge. All right. Any questions about those 2 forms? Any questions about, hopefully I haven't scared y'all. Any questions about dealing with septic systems or water right or well addendums? I hope it's been helpful. Like I said, if you're in real estate very long, you will deal with these forms, and it's really important that you understand how you need to use them and then also how you need to advise your buyers or your sellers. So a lot of it we've talked about tonight is advising buyers, but you can really help your sellers out if you know that these forms are going to be coming. These addendums are coming with the offer because you're on a septic and a well system. And this is how you can best put yourself in a position to be able to get the best offers and avoid any kind of troubles getting to the closing table. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, that's all I've got for you tonight. I hope that you found it helpful and you've learned something. And every time we get together, if there's a contract that you've come across, you've had questions about or anything, don't feel free, because I always start with asking, you know, what questions you might have. But I've always got something I'm going to be going to, and these two have come up recently, and so I thought I'd cover those tonight. All right. Thank you for joining me. And remember, you can always give me a call, send me a text message, or send me an email, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you got.